If you ask any driver what their biggest fear is, the majority of them will say fire. Back in the early years of stock car racing and racing around the world, drivers would go as far as not even wearing seatbelts at high speeds so they wouldn't be trapped in a burning car. But on May 15th, 1992, this nightmare would come to life for one driver. This is a driver's worst nightmare, the truly horrifying tragedy of Gary Batson. James Gary Batson was born in November of 1951 in South Carolina. Gary grew up with a passion for racing and cars, but didn't start racing at a young age. He owned a restaurant, locally famous for his barbecue, and a feed shop in his hometown. Influential moments in racing cites that he restored and sold cars on the side as well. The article goes on to state that Gary was oddly lucky. He was a guy in a small town that had relative success, and things just seemed to go his way. It's also noted that he was quite humble about his successes, and he was even unaware of it at times. Gary got into racing around 1985, or just around 33 years old. He frequently raced at the Greenville Pickens Speedway, a local track near his hometown. He would race here for roughly 7 years. I imagine that he built some wealth with his restaurant and side projects and had some leftover money to go racing. It was definitely just a fun hobby for Gary. But Gary did have one dream, and he was determined to race at a track that he loved, Charlotte Motor Speedway. He bought a membership in the Speedway Club, attended cup races, and attended the Speedway Stock Car Driving School. And in 1992, Gary got the shot he'd been waiting for. He got an opportunity to race a NASCAR Sportsman Division race at Charlotte Motor Speedway. The Sportsman Division was created just a few years prior, in 1989, by Humpy Wheeler, the president of Charlotte Motor Speedway. This series was full of inexperienced speedway drivers with a great narrative. It was a way for your local short track guys to get experience racing on the big super speedways. The race cars mostly consisted of leftover parts from Cup cars, the Busch Series, and the ARCA Series. This was a great concept in theory, but having a lot of inexperienced drivers on massive tracks led to some major tragedies. I really want to do a deep dive on the series in the future, but I'll just make this quick just to set the scene for the race. The Sportsman Division was already facing scrutiny heading into 1992 because of some major accidents. As predicted by many, the inexperience on fast speedways led to people getting hurt. In 1990, the second year for the series, David Gaines lost his life in a crash during practice at Charlotte. Then, in 1991, once again at Charlotte, a renowned hydroplane racing champion broke his neck in a crash. In the same incident, Ed Gartner Jr. cracked his sternum and fractured his leg. Later in the month, once again at Charlotte, Philip Ross's car spun off turn 4 and backed into the wall, bursting into flames. Philip Ross suffered second-degree burns over 30% of his body. So yeah, although the series ran at other major tracks, the real problem track was Charlotte. So this leads us to Gary Batson in 1992. In a sick irony and foreshadowing of what was to come, Gary Batson would race in the car that Philip Ross wrecked in the year prior. After suffering major burns all over his body in a horrific wreck, Philip sold his car to Lawrence Ledford, who would have Gary step into the machine for the May 15th race at Charlotte. So this race was actually just a qualifying heat to get into the 1992 Sportsman 100 race at Charlotte Motor Speedway. Beforehand, Jason Keller recalled chatting with Gary Batson, stating that he was super excited to be racing at the 1.5 mile super speedway. Unfortunately, Gary's dream would only live on for a few minutes, just about 4 laps.
Another horrifying crash. In turn 3, Gary Batson and Neil Connell's cars collided. Batson's machine got up on its side and was pinned along the wall and catch fence for several feet. After the cars finally stopped, fuel which had leaked from Batson's car erupted into a huge inferno. Connell was finally able to loosen his belts and climb out uninjured. But Batson, a restaurant and convenience store operator from Travelers Rest, South Carolina, could not escape. He suffered severe burns over...
Tragedy struck when a couple cars went spinning towards the infield of the track. Batson collided with Neil Connell in turn 4, causing the number 96 Chevy to go on its side. It scraped along the wall and the fence for about 1,000 feet. This was with the driver's door down. Batson's car burst into flames just seconds after coming to a stop. While Neil was able to escape his car, Gary was unable to climb from his machine. He sat in the car burning for nearly a minute, completely conscious the whole time. He desperately set off the in-car fire extinguisher, but it was no match for the horrific flames that encompassed his vehicle. After the fire was extinguished, he was rushed to the hospital. But Gary passed away at 12:35 a.m., early morning after the crash. He had burns on about 80% of his body, 25% third degree. He was 40 years old. The fire was a direct result of a fuel spill, which came through the filler spout when it was tipped on its side. Gary's car owner's partner, Marty Ward, stated he had been to driving school here. He did well and kept coming back for updates. He just kept moving on up. He wanted to have a sportsman car. That's all he had talked about since the middle of winter. It was a dark irony. The same car, the same turn, the same track, a fiery crash, just 1 year apart. In 1991, it was Philip Ross who escaped death. Ross even warned Gary about the safety, telling him before he got behind the wheel to make sure all of the fire gear was properly installed. Gary was highly regarded and popular around town, with hundreds attending his funeral. Among his friends were a couple of PGA Tour golfers. The late Eddie Gossage, track spokesman at the time, stated it was a freak accident. He went on to say that many of the inexperienced drivers did well to avoid the spinning vehicles. Obviously, he was defending the series after it was once again called into question after the incident. A few short years later, Russell Phillips was killed in a horrific and gruesome crash at Charlotte, effectively ending the series in 1995. The series was getting so much negative press after this accident, capped off with Bob Zeller's Legacy of Shame Sully Charlotte. This article summed up all the horrific events that happened in the series at the track. In 1996, the series had a handful of short track races, but it was pointless compared to the original mission of the series, so it folded shortly after. Gary was just your regular guy. He was a successful man around his hometown. People probably looked up to him. It was definitely a big deal when he went to race at the Charlotte Motor Speedway. But many of us will never reach our dreams, and Gary did just that, even if it only lasted a few minutes. And that's it for this video, guys. I hope you did enjoy, or I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought down in the comments down below. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss another NASCAR story. That's it from me. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.